Hello YouTube, this is Argonaut2 once again. Today we're going to take a look at my most recent acquisition, the Ruger 2245 Lite. I've actually wanted one of these for probably 2 years at least and just haven't been able to reconcile myself with buying one. But I finally came around on that. Found this one. This is actually not brand new out of the box anymore. It was when I got it, but I've taken it to the range, I've cleaned it, etc., etc. So I have it here with the box, but it's not actually brand new out of the box for the first time today. Just so you know. Anyway, my main purpose in this video today is to show you, first of all, how nice a handgun it is, but also to hopefully convince anybody out there who has wanted one, like I did for quite some time, but has heard all the horror stories about disassembling and reassembling, mostly the reassembling, not to be deterred, not to be put off by that. I've actually had this one together and apart probably more than a dozen times, maybe a dozen and a half times now, and I've had only minimal issues with it. And the thing about these is, even when you have what might seem like a major issue, stay calm, stay focused, and just back it up a step. Go back to the last step that worked and do it again, and continue to do that until you have completed the process. It will work. If you read the Ruger manual, if you go to their website and look at their tech tips or view a video such as mine, you'll see how to do this and how to do it successfully, and at worst how you're going to spend maybe a few minutes. But to put that in perspective for you, I honestly find this to be less of a challenge than I find getting that spring back into place on a Ruger 1022 when you're trying to drop the bolt back in. Or the action back in, I should say. I have a lot more trouble with that every time. And there are how many millions of those floating around. So just to put it in perspective for you, I find this to be actually easier than that. And everybody has those, and nobody really complains much about that. But they complain all over the place about these. These are not that bad if you simply follow the steps one by one. And it is perhaps more steps, but if you follow them and if you learn them, and if you familiarize yourself, it is easy. Now, before we go any further with the process, it came with a magazine that's inside the polymer frame right now. It's in place. A second magazine, Allen wrench, key, cloth case. Perfectly nice cloth case, nothing all that fancy. You will need a couple of the tools that you probably already have, and again, nothing to deter anyone. But you will need some kind of a mallet, and I would go with a non-marring mallet such as this one. You could go smaller than this, of course, but you want something that's not going to mar the metal surfaces. You will want some kind of a punch or something that can be used as a punch. I've also used a Phillips head screwdriver, a very small one on these. And typically what I'll do is I'll use cloth patches, sometimes doubled over or more, to keep the metal surfaces away from each other. And you'll want something simply like a paper clip. Really simple stuff. Another nice feature about this particular handgun, these are 2245s are designed with a threaded barrel for a suppressor if you're into that and want to put one of those on there. Very simple procedure. And we're ready to go. They also come in several different barrel styles. There's not just this barrel style, although I like this one all right. So, having said that, let's pretend that we're going to disassemble, clean, and reassemble this one just for the sake of. Now, as I mentioned, the magazine is in there. We're going to safety check. I've already safety checked this, but just so that you can see. Chamber is empty. Magazine is empty. Nothing there. Now, one of the things that Ruger tells you to do, you have to do this, and this I think is where a lot of people start having problems, is that you have to dry fire this at least twice, once on disassembling and once on reassembling, to deal with the spring tension. It simply has to happen. Many people have been told never to dry fire. That's not as true with Rugers. It may be with some other firearms, but it's not true with most Rugers, and it's certainly not true with these. You need to dry fire to release the spring tension when disassembling, and then to seat things in retension or release the tension properly when reassembling. So, now, having said that, even though we safety checked, we're going to point it in the safe direction and dry fire to release the tension on the spring, like so. Now we're going to go ahead, push the magazine release, extract the magazine, and at this point, this is where our little friend, the paper clip, comes in. You can use the paper clip to get under here and lever out that part of the mainspring assembly, and this is where the mainspring assembly is going to come out. When this is seated properly and when it's properly put together, the top of the pin on the assembly is going to be sticking up almost 1/8 of an inch. Not quite, but almost 1/8 of an inch. You're going to be pulling down perpendicularly to extract this. These are very stiff. This one is new. It is very stiff. You can use a punch, and again, I prefer to use some kind of a barrier to not mar anything, but you can use a punch to push that down and pull it out. This one I think is going to come out okay, or not. These are very stiff when they're new, so oftentimes you will need to do this, and it's not a big deal. It's kind of to be expected. So I'm just going to give it a gentle tap or two. And just like that, I can pull my patch out, and my mainspring will come right out. And now my bolt will come right out. The bolt may be interrupted inside by a few internals, but if you just simply wiggle it, shift it, it will come out quite quickly. So we've got everything disassembled, except we now need to separate the polymer frame from the barrel. Again, fairly simple process, but again, with a new Mark series, you do probably need to use a mallet or a hammer of some kind. Do not hit the metal. Don't hit either the muzzle end or the rear part where the bolt will go. There's no reason for it. All you could succeed in doing ultimately is some kind of either visual damage, aesthetic damage, or if you did it badly enough and long enough, perhaps do some actual mechanical damage. Unlikely, but it could happen. But there's no need to. All you really need to do is hold it, get your mallet. I like to do it this way with it in my hand so that any downward pressure, some of it's absorbed by the fact that I'm holding it, and I'll just give it a few short but swift whacks. And just like that, the polymer frame separates from the barrel. And there we have all the components. Now, we'll pretend that we've cleaned it. You really don't need to do any further disassembly. Ruger themselves say that you don't need to get inside. You can get in there and use a toothbrush to clean, solvents, oils, etc., but you really don't want to grit that up anymore. And there's no need for any further disassembly. They specifically state that, and I've honestly never heard of anybody wanting to get in there. If you try to disassemble further, you could end up with spare parts flying everywhere, and you really don't want that. So we'll pretend that we've cleaned the bolt. You can take the spring out if you want, clean that, put it back in place, clean the barrel, etc., etc., and now we're ready for reassembly. So the barrel is attached to the polymer frame by one lug right there, and again, because this is new and because many of these are very tight, this will be a tight fit that I can put in place with my hands, but I will probably need to use my mallet to seat properly. So I will hold it like so, using my thumb with some downward pulling pressure, and I'll get my mallet back and just tap it a few times. What you want is to get the polymer frame off the back of the barrel assembly by about 1/8 of an inch. You can probably just see there. When I first seated it a moment ago, it was up closer to being flush with that. And just by a couple semi-firm, semi-gentle whacks with a mallet, very carefully right up here, not on the metal, right here, you seat it back down about maybe 1/16 of an inch. So, ready for the next step, and this is where the trouble starts for a lot of people. What we need to do is we need to continue holding it with our left hand. We need to see that we have daylight through the pinholes there. We need to reseat the bolt. Now, what you may find is that the hammer has placed itself back up in position again. You can just stick your pinky down there and press it down. You also want to make sure that the bolt release is in a downward position, because if it's not, the release mechanism in there will be up, and it will make it hard for the bolt to float freely back down into its correct position. So with that done correctly and down, and with the hammer down, and again you can just stick your pinky in there to correct that, you can drop the bolt back into place like so. Now you want to be able to see daylight clearly through those holes. This is where the reassembly part gets trickier for most people, but doesn't need to. With your left hand, hold the bolt down, press it, rotate it over. Again, you still want a clear shot through there. With your mainspring assembly, you want to seat the pin back in there, push it all the way through until it is seated all the way. Now again, with these new guns being pretty tight, you may need to try this a time or two. And push it back through. And you want to see it popping back out the top of the pin about 1/8 of an inch out up here. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Now, this is the next part where people sometimes skip a step or aren't sure. Mark 3s and 2245s, 2245 Lites do not have, well maybe the Mark 3s do, but the 2245s and the Lites do not have that cross pin back in there that many of the other Mark series do. They do, however, have what I have come to affectionately call the dingleberry, which is that floating cam back there, which you can just probably see the reflection of. That needs to be free and clear to do its thing, but there's no other mainspring in there, or there's no other cross pin in there to make your life difficult. What you do need to do, however, is before you try putting the mainspring assembly back in its position, you need to follow these parts pretty exactly. And this is again where my video could help you, but so could the Ruger Tech Tips. You need to reinsert an empty magazine, and you need to make sure it seats all the way in. If you can use your fingers or get a fingernail under there and pull it out, it's not seated enough. You need to make sure it's all the way in. Now, holding it with your left hand, you want to push the magazine release with your right, like so. So now it's sticking up about 3/8 of an inch, maybe almost a 1/2 an inch. Leave it there. With your left hand again, put your index finger inside the trigger guard, pull the trigger a couple times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it, don't let it go. Use your thumbs, use your other parts of your left hand to keep it in place. Do not let go of that. Pull the magazine out. Now, still maintaining that trigger pull, I haven't let go. You want to make sure that the dingleberry is poked out again, and you can just see it there so that it's lying laterally, not back in, but lying laterally right in the middle of the housing. So now you can take your mainspring housing assembly, push it back in. You want approximately 1/8 of an inch. You want approximately 1/8 of an inch of tension, of pressure when you're reassembling. And now it looks like I'm going to have to do this again, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. You just redo your procedures. Magazine back in, all the way in seated. Magazine release, released. Pull the trigger. Keep the trigger pulled. Pull the magazine out with that trigger still back. Now, dingleberry back in the center there. You can see the reflection of it again. Not back, but laterally 45 degrees that way. Now, mainspring assembly back in here until you get to about here. This is where the tension part comes in. If that falls into place on its own, you need to do it again because it hasn't, the right surfaces haven't connected, the right surfaces haven't hit. So you need to do it again. If you have that 1/8 of an inch where there's spring tension, you've done it right. So now with that spring tension, I can push in, bring down the lever, and we're basically reassembled and good to go. I can now release the trigger. I'm going to flip it over, cycle a few times, reinsert a magazine, and now the second dry fire happens. The last and final dry fire, pointing it in a safe direction as always, dry firing, and there we have it. Now we know we've done it right. Magazine or bolt pulled back. We can see that it's holding correctly. Everything's in place, everything's in order, and there we go. That is how you disassemble and reassemble a 2245 Lite or the 2245s. I have a friend's Mark II that I'm going to do a video on shortly, so if you've had similar questions about that, I'll be addressing those issues quite soon. It's virtually the same procedure. There's only a slight difference at the end with the direction that you have to hold the handgun for the dingleberry to seat properly, but that's really the only difference, and I'll address that shortly. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The 2245 Lite from Ruger. Wonderful little pistol. Heck of a lot of fun to shoot. Reasonable price point. Not as scary to disassemble and reassemble. I even had a couple of hiccups on that, and you saw how quickly I was able to get it back together. So not a big deal if you just simply take your time. And honestly, the hiccups that I just had right there with it are amongst the biggest I've had. I've been able to, as I said at the outset, disassemble and reassemble this at least a dozen times, maybe a dozen and a half, maybe even close to 2 dozen, without any issues whatsoever. And the minor issues that I just encountered are about what you will encounter if you simply take your time, read directions, watch a video such as this or the Ruger Tech Tips video, and act accordingly, and just back it up a step whenever you're coming across a problem and redo your procedure. I hope this helps. I hope you have fun. Be safe out there. Please like and subscribe, and if you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to list them below, type below, and let me know what you think. Thanks.